On Iwo Jima, 70 pounds of steel and jellied gasoline on a man's back. A few seconds of fire in the tanks, then it is empty. And on that island, the internet will tell you, a man like him had a life expectancy of 4 minutes. His name is Hershel Williams. Everyone calls him Woody. He is 5 feet 6 inches tall, a farm boy from West Virginia the recruiter once turned away for being too short. And on the 23rd of February 1945, he is the only flamethrower operator left in his company on Iwo Jima. You have almost certainly seen the numbers that travel with men like Woody. 92%, 94%, 4 minutes. 335 went in, 18 came out. They are quoted in every telling over grainy footage of fire pouring into a cave. Here is what nobody quoting those numbers tells you. Every one of them is either from the wrong place, about the wrong men, or from nowhere at all. And the 2 Marines who can actually tell you what carrying that weapon was like both walked off that island alive. This is how the flamethrower worked, why it was the only thing on Iwo Jima that did, and where the numbers really come from. Before we go further, if you want more files like this one, pulled from the record instead of from the last video that covered it, subscribe to Nick's World War II archive. That is the whole ask. Now, the weapon. Start with the man who was handed one on purpose. Corporal Don Graves, Company D, 28th Marines, 5th Division, the outfit they called the Spearhead. Graves was issued a flamethrower in training because, in his words, they were good, and that is what they were going to do. Knock out pillboxes and fortifications and burn them out. The thing on his back is 3 cylinders. 2 of them hold the fuel, a little over 2 gallons each. The one in the middle holds gas under pressure, and the pressure is what does the work, pushing the fuel out through a long bent nozzle, where a small igniter lights it on the way. The fuel itself is gasoline, thickened toward a jelly so it clings and burns instead of splashing. The middle cylinder holds nitrogen, not oxygen, and nitrogen does not burn. That matters because it undoes the most cinematic idea about this weapon. The flamethrower man as a walking bomb, 1 bullet from blowing himself to pieces. The tanks do not detonate. What a round through them actually does is quieter, and in its way worse. It does not go off, it leaks, and a man soaked in his own thickened gasoline, standing next to open flame, can burn alive. On Iwo Jima, at least 1 did, in the gorge at the north end of the island, when the Japanese shot the fuel out of his tanks and turned him into a torch. So the real danger was never that the man would explode. It was that he was the most conspicuous target on the field, carrying the one substance around him that would keep burning once it caught. Graves worked the odds out himself, lying in the ash under fire. The 2 fuel tanks he noticed were oval. A round coming in from behind, he figured, would probably hit that curved steel and skid off. The one line straight up his spine, between the tanks, was the gap that could kill him. He carried the weapon knowing exactly where he was, and was not protected. What the tanks buy you is a few seconds, not minutes, seconds. On paper, a full load was 8 to 10 seconds of fire. The men who actually fired it remember it differently, and the difference is honest. Graves remembered about 6 or 7 bursts, 15 seconds if you held the trigger down and dumped it all at once. A collector who fires a restored one today gets closer to 6, call it what it was. A handful of 1-second bursts, and then you are a man on an open slope with an empty tank and a pistol, because the flamethrower is too long to carry a rifle with. That is the trade at the center of everything. To use those few seconds, you first have to reach the target. And on Iwo Jima, reaching the target was the entire war. The Japanese commander, General Kuribayashi, had studied the islands that came before, and he had drawn the right lesson from them. He forbade the wild charges, He ordered his men to stay in their holes and fight to the last from inside them. His engineers had carved something like 11 miles of tunnel through the soft volcanic rock, and they had linked the caves and the pillboxes into one network so that a man could move underground from a position you had just cleared to a position behind you and open fire again from ground you thought was yours. So the ordinary answer failed. You threw a grenade through the firing slit, and the blast bent around the zigzag inside, and the machine gun kept firing. You blew the entrance with a satchel charge, and an hour later the gun was back, manned from below. The Marines needed a weapon that did not just make noise inside a pillbox, but filled it, that reached around the corners the shrapnel could not, and took the air itself. That was the flamethrower. Not because it was clever, because nothing else worked. The official Marine method was written down, and it is exactly what these men did. Rifle and automatic fire pins the position. The flame operator works up the flank, out of the gun's narrow field of fire. He fires across the face of the cave or the slit, then advances into his own fire, walking behind the flame until he can put the stream directly through the opening. Then the demolition men run in and blow it for good, so nobody comes back up through it that night. Now notice what that asks of the man carrying the tanks. He is the one who has to stand up. He is the one the whole enemy line is now looking at. Because the second the Japanese defenders saw that distinctive backpack and the first lick of flame, they knew exactly what it meant, and every weapon they had swung toward it. His own squad's job was to keep him alive the few seconds it took to close the distance. It did not always work, which is how Woody Williams ended up alone. Williams went ashore on the 21st of February with the 3rd Division, which had come to Iwo Jima as the floating reserve under V Amphibious Corps, the parent command for the entire invasion. The operation had a name, Operation Detachment. They had been told, out on the ships, that they would probably not be needed, and that the whole thing might be over in 3 to 5 days. Nobody had told them about the 21,000 men in the ground or the miles of tunnels, because nobody knew. They circled offshore for a day because there was no room on the beach to land, and when they finally went in, the beach was stacked with wrecked equipment and with the dead wrapped in their own ponchos and stacked along the beach edge. Williams says he has never lost that picture. He did not set out to be the flamethrower man. He came ashore with 6 Marines under him, 2 apiece for the other companies, because he was the supply corporal, the one who was supposed to keep the assault team stocked with demolitions and flamethrowers. But his 6 men were gone, killed or wounded. He never learned which, and that left him the only trained flamethrower operator still standing in the company. His captain calls the sergeants into a shell crater to work out how to break the string of pillboxes that has them stopped cold. And near the end of it, the captain turns to him and asks if he thinks he can do something with a flamethrower against those positions. Williams could never remember what he said. Other Marines told him afterward. They said he said, "I'll try." This is the 4 hours that earned Woody Williams the Medal of Honor. They give him 4 riflemen to keep him alive. For the next 4 hours, he works the pillboxes one at a time, the way the manual says and the way no manual can make bearable. Up the flank, fire into the slit, back across open ground to the rear to swap the empty tanks for a full set, because a flamethrower gives you only seconds, and forward again. When enemy riflemen try to stop him with bayonets, he destroys them with a burst of flame. 2 of the 4 riflemen covering him were killed that day, keeping him alive. Now listen to how Williams himself describes what he did. It is not how the videos describe it. He says he took out the pillboxes in front of them, or at least, he adds, the enemy inside them. He was a corporal. He knew nothing beyond his own small patch. What it opened, his commanding officer told him afterward, was a lane the company could push through. That is the whole claim, in his own careful words. Not a hero counting his kills. a man who did a job and was told afterward what it had opened. For that action, Williams received the Medal of Honor from President Truman, and he said, for the rest of his life, that he never fully understood why it had come to him, when Marines standing right beside him did not get home. Historians still argue over the exact tally behind the medal, over how many pillboxes and how many men. Williams himself never claimed the bigger number. He only ever told the smaller, truer version. Don Graves came home too, and Graves is the one who can put a number in its place, because one of the most repeated numbers on the internet is his. You will hear it said that of the flamethrower operators on Iwo Jima. 335 went in and only 18 came out. It gets read out as the casualty rate of the men who carried the weapon. It is not. Those are the numbers Don Graves gives for his own outfit, Company D of the 28th Marines. 335 men landed with it. 18, he says, walked off the island, himself among them, the only flamethrower man in his company to do it. When an interviewer read those numbers back to him as a fact about his unit, he said simply, correct. Somewhere between his mouth and the internet, his company became the flamethrower branch, and a rifle unit slaughter became a statistic about one weapon. So where does the famous number come from? The 92%. It comes from a real document, and the document is more honest than the videos that quote it. It is the United States Army's own official history of the Chemical Warfare Service, published in 1966. In its chapter on the flamethrower in the Pacific, in a single 6-word sentence, it says, one battalion reported 92% losses, and the footnote names the battalion. It was a battalion of the 21st Marines on Iwo Jima. Woody Williams' own regiment, the unit next to his. One battalion, not the island. Not every operator who ever carried the weapon. And the word is losses, casualties, killed and wounded together, not a body count. The history is careful to say only that on Iwo Jima, the flamethrower operators' casualties, in its words, shot upward, and that the rate was probably higher than in any other Pacific campaign. That is the true and sober version of the number. It is one battalion's terrible arithmetic, quoted correctly, and it has been stretched across an entire island ever since. And the 4 minutes. The 4-minute life expectancy, the number that titles the videos, it appears in no wartime document anyone has ever produced. Trace it back and it dissolves into a magazine sentence that credits it to, and this is the whole of the attribution, a military statistician, no name, no unit, no study. It is the one number everybody knows and nobody can produce. Even the count of operators is a phantom. The Army history says each Marine division carried 243 flamethrowers to Iwo Jima, 27 to a battalion, and that most of them sat in reserve on purpose, because the weapon was so likely to be lost that they kept one spare for everyone in use. Those spares are the full sets Woody Williams kept running back across open ground to strap on. There was never a neat pool of 335 flamethrower men to be 94% killed. The neat numbers were built after the fact, by people who needed the story to be tidy. There is one more thing the record corrects, and it undoes the most dramatic beat in the popular telling. You will hear that as the operators died in the open, more than 90% of them, the commanders finally had the idea to put the flame inside a tank, and so the flame tank was born of Iwo Jima's slaughter. It was not. The flame tank was already there. Improvised flame-throwing tanks had gone into combat more than a year before Iwo at the Battle of Bougainville on the 30th of January 1944, when light tanks with flame guns bolted into them fought for a strongpoint the Americans called the Hornet's Nest. They were crude, and nobody would have called them a finished weapon, but they existed, and by the summer of 1944, purpose-built flame tanks were fighting across the Marianas, at Saipan and Guam, months before anyone set foot on Iwo Jima. By the time the Marines landed there, the 4th and 5th Divisions each brought 4 of them. The POA CWS-H1, a Sherman-based machine built specifically for this work, big enough to throw fire 100 yards and carry nearly 300 gallons. The tank did not answer the men's deaths. It was already in their hands. What Iwo Jima did was teach them to lean on it. The history says the Marines quickly became dependent on the flame tanks and constantly asked for them. And on some days, one tank battalion burned between 5,000 and 10,000 gallons of thickened gasoline out of just 3 or 4 machines. The Corps report called the flame tank the only effective means of reducing many of the island's concrete positions. So put the real picture back together. The flamethrower was not a suicide device handed to the doomed. It was 70 pounds of the only tool that could reach into Kuribayashi's caves, carried by ordinary men who understood exactly how little protection they had and stood up anyway. Some of them died in the first minutes. One battalion lost nearly all of its operators, and some of them, Woody Williams, Don Graves, carried the weapon through the worst of it and lived to be old men, and to correct, patiently, the numbers that had turned their friends into a statistic. That is the part the 4-minute version cannot hold. Because the story was never really about how fast the flamethrower man died. It was about what it cost the ones who didn't. Woody Williams lived to be 98, the last living Medal of Honor recipient of the Second World War. The Navy later commissioned a ship in his honor, the USS Hershel Woody Williams, a recognition that his name would outlast the arguments about the numbers. Don Graves is still here, 101 years old now, still telling it. And when you listen to these men, neither one talks about the fire. They talk about the 2 riflemen who died covering Williams. For more than 70 years, he did not even know their names. And when he finally learned them, he said the medal had never been his. It belonged to them. They talk about the squad leader Graves lost, whose tortured body was found. They talk about the ones wrapped in ponchos along the beach edge on the first morning. Woody Williams spent the rest of his life asking a single question about the medal on his chest. Why was he selected to receive the nation's highest award when the Marines right beside him did not get home? He carried the flamethrower for a few days in 1945. He carried that question for 77 years. And that, far more than any number, is what it meant to be the flamethrower Marine who lived through Iwo Jima.